Something long neglected inside the mare's iron heart fractured briefly, and she let forth a bursting sigh. Making up for it, she smiled bravely up at him and murmured in a wavering voice, "I'm almost certain she would appreciate that, Spike." Hmm, she always was an avid appraiser of all things beautiful. A long breath, and he smirked down towards the pony. And she would thrash you within an inch of your life for so savagely curtailing your own gifts, child. My what now? Scootaloo briefly blinked, then blushed. Oh. She ran a foreleg over the violet stubble lingering on the back of her mane. There aren't too many frickin' beauty pageants in the wastelands. Not like I was ever into keeping my looks up when I was a little foal anyway. Besides, she sighed, my hair has made far better use as insulators and filaments for chemical rune crafting. I completely understand, Spike nodded, though it makes my test here much harder. He cleared his smoking throat and smiled politely. Would it bother you much if I asked you for part of one of your eyelashes? I beg your pardon? Scootaloo made a face. I promise it won't hurt. The elder dragon bowed. And you've suffered enough lately for me to ever bother asking for a blood sample. Eyelash it is. Scootaloo stood up towards him and softly closed her eyes. Just be careful where you point those claws of yours. I always am, child. His voice came closer as a pair of claws lit up under a green exhale. Effortlessly, the gentle dragon plucked the hair from her face and dropped it into the jar. Scootaloo fluttered her eyes open in time to see the dragon breathe a plume of emerald fire in the glass container. The bright green tongues billowed around the near indiscernible eyelash as she swiftly closed the jar, twisted it shut, and raised the glowing thing up toward the center of Princess Celestia's mirror. The glass at the top of the ceiling projected a beam of light through the jar, shining through the combined essences of dragon and pony, and at the other side of the prism there refracted a dazzling array of moving pictures framed by billowing green waves of magic. The last pony watched with mesmerized disbelief as several memories of her life were being replayed before her in a spinning array of images. A grand gray kaleidoscope of 25 years of wasteland exile flickered before the two of them. She saw a playback of the drunken ogre harassing her in front of Pit at the Monkey Dozen Den, a goggled rodent smiling from across the hazy interior of Bruce's airship, even a lonely pony reading Princess Celestia's journal in a swaying hammock under the lantern light. Ah, so I was right. Spike suddenly beamed as he pointed his free finger towards the floating image of a pony lifting up a lattice of prismatic light beams. You were the source of that rainbow beacon. What other creature in the wasteland besides a pony would produce something so magnificent? He smiled and winked her way. It was in good faith, you see, that I erupted random bits of green flame over the rooftops of Ponyville, figuring that it would attract you in turn. Dang right it did. Scootaloo numbly droned, still overwhelmed by the spinning kaleidoscope of her memories that were still rotating behind her. There were so many moments, so many lonely scavenger hunts, so many gray trips into desolation, so many brushes with death, and yet they all looked the same, were colored with the same lifeless hue. A lump formed slowly in her throat. Hello? Spike's eyes narrowed on the crackling face of Gilliam. The dirigible dog's metal-plated skull floated translucently between the two of them. And who's this handsome creature? More like who was that handsome creature? Scootaloo spat, a clearing of her throat. Spike, do you mind? I'm not entirely enthused about looking at all of these again. Oh, by all means. He nodded and gave the jar a little shake as he lowered it from the shimmering face of Celestia's mirror above. The images were replaced with memories from nearly 20 years ago. A pony with a brighter coat and softer eyes was seen hammering together the pieces of the harmony, crafting moon rocks, constructing the signal lattice, shaving the hair off her tail. Another shake, and Spike lowered the jar further from the preserved sunlight. The spinning images flickered, then briefly roared with a red flame as Scootaloo's essence leaped the cataclysmic bridge. Yes, there we are. Suddenly, all of the images shone with vibrant color. An orange filly with bright violet eyes rocketed across the shimmering links of Ponyville atop a scooter. Dozens of smiling, colorful faces came into view, of crusaders, of mentors, of friendly strangers and bright smiles. There were rivers, there were mountains, there were clouds, and there was a sky, a blue sky. Finally there flickered forth the laughing and grinning faces of ponies, of foals and blank flanks, of a forest and a clubhouse, of blue feathers and a rainbow mane. In a flash the lights all vanished. Scootaloo sharply inhaled the vacuum left behind by them, and her eyes twitched moistly to see the green oasis coalesce back into view, buckling slightly from the very real and gray world lurching outside. She was almost too numb to resist the words coming from Spike next. "It is as I thought. The images conjured are brighter with you than they are with all the rest." Scootaloo gulped, rubbing her face with her foreleg and gazing at him. The rest of what, Spike?" "The samples. The remains of all the ponies who have died before you, child," Spike said. He handed the smoking jar to Scootaloo, who merely gazed at the smoldering ashen bits of her eyelash inside the container. "Using my green flame as a telescope, I've been able to look into the past beyond the day of the cataclysm which I cannot time travel through. To do this, I've required the essences and ashes of dead ponies as a regent. But your essence, that of a living pony, transcends the cataclysmic barricade even further. The memories you project are of a color and vibrancy that makes the other ponies' images pale in comparison. As of now, I have no doubt whatsoever." Scootaloo gazed confusedly at him as he walked across the lengths of the garden. "No doubt of what, Spike?" "That you can go where I cannot," he stated matter-of-factly as he strolled over toward a crate full of gardening tools and other supplies on the broad side of the overgrown warehouse. "Because you are the last living pony, I can send you back to a time before the cataclysm by anchoring your essence of your soul self, to the ponies that were just as alive then as you are now. Granted, even that will have limits." He effortlessly opened a heavy crate with his massive limbs and rummaged through it. "For instance, I will only be able to send you back to the years when I was alive, and within the range of the ponies whose souls I've has in contact with. Miss Cheerilee is one such example. Because you're alive now and she was alive then, your common pony essence can make contact, bridging the gap in magic that the cataclysm sliced when it ended the lives of Celestia and Luna." He smiled victoriously as he produced a familiar-looking glass jar from the crate. With a hot breath, he covered the container in green flame, sending it back to 5 minutes ago. "It's only fitting, Scootaloo, that you can venture back to a time where I can't." The last pony glanced at the identical jar in her grasp. In a nervous jolt, she dropped it to the garden floor like it was a plague and gazed shakily at the dragon before her. "Me? Spike, I don't know. This is all too—" She clasped her head in two hooves, fought away the urge to hyperventilate, and all but snarled. "I mean, what the hey, Spike? Suddenly I can go into the past? Just like that?" "It's hardly a development that happened overnight, Scootaloo." He gazed calmly at her as he strolled back on aging haunches. "To come to this point of epiphany, I had to undergo countless years of magical and mathematical calculations. You are quite simply the missing key I needed to make the journey complete. How ironic is it that the last pony alive would fit into such a puzzle?" "Ironic?" Scootaloo balked at him. "Maybe it all fits together just fine for you. You, who have spent eons lurking about in caves and labs trying to piece this whole mess together. But I've spent barely a fraction of those years trying to deal with just how every pony I've ever cared for is dead, knowing full well that there was not a single dang thing I could do about it." She sighed heavily and rested a pair of hooves on one of his arms. "Spike, you can't possibly ask me to do this. Haven't I had enough weight on my shoulders?" "And what do you think it is that I'm asking of you, child?" She gulped and gave him a hollow expression, something of a mix of horror and excitement. You want me to go back into the past and change all that has happened somehow." The last pony was surprised to see how swiftly and solemnly he shook his head. "No, old friend, that is not what I am asking of you." It's not?" "Because the past cannot be changed, Scootaloo. The cataclysm, in all of its monumental horror and dread, must happen, no matter what you or I do." The air in the garden collapsed instantly. Not even the insects buzzed overhead. Celestia's mirror seemed a lot dimmer as Scootaloo's tired scarlet eyes wandered the room in an aimless lurch. Soon, her gaze fell back onto Spike and she murmured in a foolish whine, "But why?" "Because time is immutable, child." "Immutable? What do you mean?" Spike inhaled deeply, a gentle breath, and he clasped a hand softly over her shoulder. "Here, walk with me." Once more the soft snow and ash of the wasteland fell coldly on Scootaloo's coat, christening her. She sat her bandaged self atop Spike's broad backside, resting as he gently strolled through the decaying ruins of wounded vistas of Ponyville. Shattered buildings and splintered trees drifted softly past them as the purple dragon carried the lone pony over the fossils of yesteryear. "Tell me, Scootaloo, with the knowledge from your years of roaming the skies and reading, who are the 6 goddess sisters?" "Seriously?" She raised a humored eyebrow and smirked at his green neck crest. "You want me to recite that kindergarten lesson?" "Humor me if you would." The brown-coated mare took a deep breath. Her scarlet eyes scanned an invisible book as she recited emotionlessly to the ashen air. "The 6 goddess sisters, as every pony knows, are the divine alicorn sisters of the goddess Epona, who ascended to the stars in the cosmic exodus which brought about the end of the first age." "And who were these alicorns specifically?" Scootaloo stirred, then laid herself down atop Spike's bobbing shoulders and monotonously went on. "The goddesses of revolution, Princess Celestia and Princess Luna, stayed on the earth to oversee the rising of the sun and moon over the land of Equestria. The other 4 sisters would leave halfway through the second age, much like their cosmic mother, Queen Epona, though their essences remained in the physical world. The first 2 were the goddesses of the elements, Princess Electra and the goddess of the land, and Princess Nebula, the goddess of the firmaments. The other 2 were the goddesses of law, Princess Giltaphine, the goddess of life, and who else?" The pony blinked, her brown eyes twitching in sudden interest as she heard herself murmur, "Princess Entropa, the goddess of time."
"Ah, so you do recollect her."
Spike's snout flexed as a result of a hidden smile.
"I'm proud of all the knowledge that you've retained, child.
You're far from the upstart little foal that used to forsake trips to the library for zip-lining her way through the ever-free forest." Scootaloo produced a bitter smirk as she gently rested her cheek against his back. "You're not the only one who's changed, Spike."
Still, it is quite important that you understand the part Princess Entropa plays in the fabric of time."
The dragon spoke as he strolled the 2 of them across the shattered womb of Ponyville.
"She may be a goddess in perpetual exodus, like her mother Queen Epona,
but she is far from utterly detached. Her essence still animates the flow of time, maintaining it as a law, but not just any law. It's an immutable law. Time cannot be changed. It can be traversed, much like a sailor crosses an ocean, but you cannot convert that ocean into something else. Even when traveling the currents of reversed time as I have mastered, there is no alteration to time itself. As a consequence, there is no way to change the cause and effect of events as managed by time. We cannot go back and prevent the cataclysm from happening, for it was the tragedy of the cataclysm itself that gave anyone impetus to travel in time in the first place. Changing the cataclysm would not only be a paradox of logic, it would be an abomination of Princess Entropa's sacred law. What has transpired, no matter how tragic, must remain immutable." "But if Princess Entropa's law is so sacred, why would she let something so horrible happen? And to all of her sister ponies?" Scootaloo suddenly moaned. "Wouldn't she want living things like us to, I don't know, intervene on behalf of Equestria and stop the cataclysm from ever happening to begin with?"
"That is a very noble question, child."
Spike's neck bowed. His shoulders briefly stopped lurching as his body came to a stop.
"Scootaloo, take a look before us. Do you see where we are?"
Blinking curiously, Scootaloo crawled up to her hooves and trotted a few meters along his neck. As soon as her vision rounded the crest of his skull, she froze. The mare saw before the 2 of them an array of dull white stones splotched across the thick black mound of earth in the center of Ponyville. For all of the cataclysmic horrors that shook the terrain of her home, She was almost as amazed as she was heartbroken to be present staring at the remarkably well-preserved cemetery, a place she had very rarely ventured in her foolish years. "There has always been death in Equestria," she murmured educatedly into the misty air. "I think I see where you're going with this, Spike. Why didn't Intropa intervene on their behalf?"
Perhaps it's because Giltophine's job to monitor the passage of souls into the great beyond. Or perhaps because Entropa, as a goddess of law, necessitated being a princess of neutrality. Whatever the case, our mutual need to question her motive only highlights our mortal nature. Earth ponies, gifted in knowledge of medicine, and unicorns employing various talents of mysticism had struggled for millennia to construct countermeasures for death. But they could never fashion anything to prevent it. Otherwise, all of these stones here would have been placed with immortals to this very day.
He turned and gazed over his shoulder at Scootaloo with dim green eyes.
Similarly have I, in 300 years of optimistic searching, attempted to find a way to change the sway of time, and like so many other equestrian physicists before me, I have failed.
"But did you at least even try, Spike?" Scootaloo gazed back at him. "Granted, I know you couldn't go back far enough to experiment before the cataclysm, but in this timeline, in the Fourth Age, surely you've had to have tried to change history."
An astute assumption on your part,"
he nodded. He turned away from the cemetery and marched back into the depths of Ponyville while the pony settled once more onto the square of his back.
"I did experiment, Scootaloo. After my 6th and 7th trips on reverse time, I performed many acts of blind sabotage on my past selves to see if my interference could alter my present condition in any fashion. What I discovered was on every single occasion some coincidental event would either catastrophically undo all of my manipulations, or else ironically link my affectations to the real circumstances that my past selves had chronicled as having happened."
"Were they all blind experiments?" Scootaloo asked, all the while rubbing her aching head. "Did you ever, I don't know, try talking to your past self?"
As a matter of fact, I did.
The pony blinked. She nervously chirped. "How did that go?"
Boringly, considering I remembered everything that was asked or answered. A deep discourse with Time's doppelgangers doesn't afford any deviance from the immutable truth that confounds us today, Scootaloo. Though I must admit,"
he smiled as a whelpish shade of yesteryear bubbled briefly to the surface of his adult purple scales,
"you've never lived until you've played a game of hide and seek with your chronological double."
"So then, that proves it?" Scootaloo murmured defeatedly. "After so many repeated experiments, this is what we have to work with? Could the cataclysm be different somehow, Spike? Or could I be somehow different? Because my pony essence allows me to go into the past further than yourself? Maybe time won't be unchangeable for me. Maybe—" Her voice cut off at the sight of him briefly twisting his neck around to gaze sadly at her with a shaking head.
"What I've calculated, what I tested, and what I experienced, Scootaloo, is something that can be explained, but never shared. Not directly, at least,"
he murmured and faced ahead once more.
"But suffice it to say, it laid in concrete a truth that I could no longer deny. The past can be visited, it can be witnessed, it can even be supported, but no, child, it cannot be changed. What dies must remain dead, what lives must remain living. It has been that way since the twilight years before the First Age, and the blossoming days of creation, when all that was one split into the forces of harmony and discord, and everything has remained necessarily dichotomous since."
"It's just so unfair," the brown-haired mare murmured. Spike brought the two of them into the skeletal hovel of an old garden behind a hollowed-out restaurant. He let her down with a gentle arm as she trotted forlornly past a cluster of large mushrooms and gazed into the statue of Mary Foles frozen in mid-gallop. "Why would we be granted the ability to move back and forth in time when we can't even make a difference from it?"
"Why do things live to dream and desire, but only to have death as their ultimate fate?"
Spike Socratically replied as he settled down against a wall of overgrown and burnt brambles.
"These are the test of mortals. We can only question them as long as we live."
"Like I said," she sighed and squatted down onto the cracked marble bench, "it's unfair." Her nostrils flared as her scarlet eyes fluttered over the snowy ground. All I have from my past, Spike, are happy memories and regrets. The memories are happy because they remind me I used to be something that mattered in a living world. The regrets are always there because I know that the memories will only ever be just that, memories. But now you and I have reunited, and you're telling me that I can relive those memories? Just why the heck would I want to do that, Spike? At least when I had the tiniest bit of hope that I might not have been the last pony, memories had meaning to them. Now they're just the same dead end as the future is to me. The past is meaningless now.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that, child.
He smiled gently towards her. His face and breath surged with a bizarre enchantment of pride and admiration, shaking her to her core.
Something cannot be meaningless, yet holds so many answers.
Like what answers?
Answers to questions that are lost to my 300 years of contemplation as they are to your 25 years of courage.
His eyes narrowed and his deep bass voice rumbled.
What caused the cataclysm? What consumed the lives of Princess Celestia and Princess Luna? Did any pony foresee this holocaust to come? Why is it that all the ponies died, but there are still living creatures meandering across the shadows of the equestrian kingdom?
You had a good guess earlier, Spike, Scootaloo murmured. If something attacked the essence of ponies, then maybe that's why they all turned to ash, but it doesn't explain why I'm here.
You may yet be able to find out,
Spike said with a smile.
We may both be able to find out, but it involves a brave experiment, with journeys that I am not capable of taking. You are. In the past, Scootaloo, there are more than memories and regrets. If I may dare say so, there are answers. But most of all, there could be healing.
Healing? Scootaloo raised an eyebrow. With a bitter raspberry she shook her head and gazed up towards the dim twilight hanging like an ancient ghost above the dead world. Do I look like an expert on healing?
There's always a place to start, child,
Spike said.
If not for you, then for Equestria.
Her ears pricked at that. She glanced aside. For Equestria? What do you mean, Spike?
If we can ascertain what it was that caused the cataclysm, what it was that ended the goddesses of revolution, then we may be able in our time to find a way to reverse the damage that has been done. Though ponydom is gone forever, Scootaloo, we may yet find a way to bring light back into this land of death and darkness, much like I was able to construct that fabulous garden that mesmerized you earlier.
You mean there might be a way to bring the sun and the moon back? Scootaloo thought aloud, her eyes blankly wandering the garden around them. It would be a bright Equestria. Only no equestrians. She gulped. Is that really the best outlook we can afford ourselves here, Spike?
I did say you could do some healing, old friend, he chuckled.
She groaned. Spike, please, this is not my place. She slumped forward on the marble bench and sighed. Not now, not then, not ever.
Isn't it?
He leaned his snout to the side and gazed at her sharply.
You are an intelligent, crafty, responsible, tender-hearted individual, Scootaloo. Even underneath that rough, shaved exterior, you are everything your race has ever endeared itself through the ages to be. Do not let 2.5 decades of tragedy and pain disguise the legend that you have become. You are not only the end of ponies, but you are the epitome of them.
A gentle exhale, and his face turned melancholic.
Do I honestly, truly think that sending you back will absolutely grant us the ability to undo the curse that has robbed night and day from the wastes of Equestria?
He slowly shook his snout.
No, Scootaloo, I do not. But I do know this. You are the last pony, and before you die, and you will someday die, like all of your friends and kin have done before you, would any other soul deserve no less than a chance to revisit that which gave her breath, that which gave her purpose, that which gave her memories of hope and not regret, to become this amazing creature which you are so mightily right now?
I can't say, Spike. Her voice choked as she struggled for an answer. What you're asking of me is to attend a funeral for which there will never be a eulogy, even if I was the one to write it. Because no matter what I do, it all ends with me.
Which is why I advise this of you instead.
He stood up on his haunches and paced across the garden.
Leave Ponyville.
She blinked wildly. What?
Leave.
he said, gazing softly back at her.
Take off in your splendid airship. Spend time inside the womb of the Harmony. Do what you normally do in the clouds above the waste. Live out your life like you've always lived it out these last 2 decades. But most of all, do not return until the end of the next coming storm front. And then, you may come back to me and, if you wish, and only if you wish, I will send you back to the days before dying. And we can write that eulogy together, Scootaloo. He grinned warmly. What do you say?
The last pony stared back up at her old friend, at the purple shades of the past standing like a surreal ghost before her, and for the briefest of moments the snow cleared and his emerald eye slits she saw the reflection of the tiny filly, its violet eyes bright and its pink mane fluttering in a draconian twinkle, something akin to a foolish smile, and Scootaloo breathed, "I'm liking this idea."